This is Nutcliff Mill, which was a major centre of production in the late 19th century when Hebden Bridge was dubbed Fustianopolis. It really was a major centre of fustian production.
And who owned this mill then?
It was owned by the Hebden Bridge Fustian Manufacturing Cooperative Society, founded in 1870. And originally they rented rooms. They were fustian cutters, but they really wanted a mill where they could dye the cloth as well. So they subscribed £3 a week. They aimed to raise £1,000. Eventually, they did secure a mortgage, and that enabled them to purchase a 4-storey mill on this site.
So this wasn't one of those wool mills where the workers were mercilessly exploited then. They had a bit of a share in it.
They did indeed. They had bonuses, annual bonuses of 2 weeks' wages, which would be £2, 5 shillings, which maybe might have paid for a holiday in the late 19th century.
But by the 1960s, the golden days of fustian were over. Mills were demolished or stood empty. Hebden Bridge began to die as people left in search of work elsewhere. Its revival began when a new and unexpected group of people moved in.
Well, they called us hippies. I mean, I suppose we were. And we were perhaps a bit colourful. Certainly I had long hair at the time, and the women had long skirts, and we stood out from the local people. But generally, I think we were welcomed.
Well, they were so different. They were dressed so different. I mean, at one time you never saw anything but farmers and the locals. Well, they just had their own way of being. They hadn't seen. It was like foreigners coming in, which they were, I suppose, in a way.
The way they were dressing,
yeah,
and the way they
behaved.
behaved.
They were just different. It was a very good thing for Hebden. It changed the whole essence of the place. It brought it back to life.
We didn't have much money, and so we had this giant squat. I mean, it was nearly the size of this whole terrace. And we squatted about 3/4 of it. There were artisans, potters, musicians.
Did you have a job or what?
No. We were the kind of your normal image of hippies, I suppose. But having said that, we were very busy. I mean, we were always involved in doing things. And one of the things that we did do was set up the first whole food workers cooperative in the UK, Aurora Whole Foods. And people came from all over, from 50 miles. People came just to get their rice and lentils because they couldn't get it anywhere else.
John Craven reporting. And we'll be meeting ex-hippie and Hebden Bridge resident Chris Ratcliffe again shortly. On the hills above Hebden Bridge lies the little village of Heptonstall. Today it looks quaint and inviting, but in the early 60s it was a different story. Imagine this place before the cobbles had been replaced or the buildings restored. A little like Hebden Bridge below, this was an industrial village inhabited by people working in declining industry, where farmers eked out a living in this tough environment. So why is one of America's best-known poets buried here, hidden in the corner of a churchyard? Sylvia Plath was born in Boston in 1932 and is one of the most popular and influential female poets of recent history. Her work emphasised the intimate and sometimes unflattering details of her personal life, a style which was ahead of its time. But her poetry is often overshadowed by her life. Her troubled and passionate relationship with the English poet laureate Ted Hughes, her mental health problems, and her tragic suicide at the age of 30. Hughes, of course, came from West Yorkshire, and he and Sylvia Plath lived here for a short time during their marriage, although their main home was in Devon. And yet here in the graveyard, there's no signs pointing to her grave. In fact, her resting place is indistinguishable from any others. So why is Plath, such a powerful and charismatic woman in life, afforded no comfort in death, buried largely anonymously, so far from home? There are many questions surrounding the death of this extraordinary woman. Some were posed and answered by Elaine Connell, for whom the study of Plath was a passion. She died recently, but her long-term partner Chris Ratcliffe is helping to continue her work. I've been searching for her grave everywhere.
Well, I know, it's very hard to find. There's nowhere to... There's no signs. But it is somewhere down over there. You can walk around this graveyard, and people do, without finding it for a long time.
Because people come from a long way to see this grave, don't they?
They do, but there's no help given to them. And here it is.
Here it is.
Yeah.
Wow, this is not what I expected at all.
I know.
What I find amazing is that, you know, such a iconic woman has such an anonymous
One of
grave.
America's greatest poets. Her poetry was different to how poetry was before. She started talking about things that were important to women, childbirth, menstruation, the everyday, in a way that poets hadn't really entered before. And I think that was one of the reasons she was claimed by the feminist movement in the 60s as someone who they respected.
Plath's poetry was very powerful.
The horizons ring me like faggots, tilted and disparate and always unstable. Touched by a match they might warm me, and their fine lines singe the air to orange before the distances they pin evaporate, weighting the pale sky with a soldier colour, but they only dissolve and dissolve like a series of promises as I step forward.
I have to say, I really like the grave. There's something quite moving about it. I think it shows how she affected so many people around the world, and also how it affected them by leaving these little trinkets and strange things. But what I'm fascinated by is the inscription. If you look at her name, Sylvia Plath Hughes, the Hughes doesn't match everything else. Is there a reason for that?
In the 80s, the gravestone was defaced on more than one occasion, presumably by feminists who took objection to the Hughes name being there. The Hughes name was defaced and removed.
So was she a feminist?
Well, that's one of the great debates. I mean, she was writing poetry at a time before the feminist movement had got going in the 60s, and Elaine says that you can only understand her poetry not really by using the term feminist or feminine, but by looking at the context of her time. She was writing in the 50s. She became a poet at a time when there weren't many female poets of note. At the same time, there are parts of her poetry that couldn't be said to be feminist. Every woman adores a fascist is one of her famous lines. So it's the kind of submissive side of some of her poetry that you could say, well, it's hardly consistent with being feminist.
And why here? Why was she buried in this graveyard?
Well, that's another one of the mysteries. She didn't really live that much in Heptonstall. She was based in London or in Devon. Hughes might have been thinking at the time she died of coming back to live here, so that could be a possible reason. Other reason that's been put forward is that it was some kind of revenge on the part of Ted Hughes, that she didn't particularly like Heptonstall, and so there he would shovel her here.
Extraordinary.
There is no life higher than the grass tops or the hearts of sheep, and the wind pours by like destiny, bending everything in one direction. I can feel it trying to funnel my heat away. If I pay the roots of the heather too close attention, they will invite me to whiten my bones among them.
The intensity and clarity of Sylvia Plath's writing means that her poetry, like herself, will never be forgotten. And the fact that so many of these questions remain unanswered means that she remains an enigma in death, as she was in life. The heights of Heptonstall give way now to some even more wuthering moors, as my journey through West Yorkshire nears its end. I'm back in the heart of Bronte country, on the wild moors above Haworth. In a moment, I'll be catching up with poet Shah March to hear the world premiere of a poem commissioned especially for CountryTracks. First though, it's the weather for the week ahead.